fan of the UFC video game franchise, you probably recognize the guy on the left-hand side of this picture. If you're a fan of UFC watching in general, maybe you're new to the sport from 2020 because there's been so many of you joining the Fight Night Picks fold that it's hard to keep track of, and we really do appreciate you. You might not be familiar with the guy on the left-hand side of the screen. We have Thomas Almeida, the return of the Mac, and he's taken on Jonathan.
You have to call me Dragon.
Martinez, and I'm really looking forward to this fight because from Jonathan Martinez, he's a guy that came in on short notice to the UFC, and it was one of those, what are we going to get? I mean, he had competed with Combate in the past. He had lost to Matt Schnell. He had beaten Randy Hines over with Fist Fight Night 2, and he came into the UFC take on Andrade Sukumtoth, and I thought, okay, well, this was UFC Moncton, and I was there covering it, and you had Jonathan Martinez. That fight was on the main card, strangely enough. And when we interviewed him, you could barely get 2 words out of the poor guy. He was just a really nervous guy. I mean, he's kind of like shy, and it is what it is. He loses that fight to Sukumtoth, and it was up a weight class. It just wasn't really a close fight for him, or we thought it was up a weight class. Then he takes on Luigi Buren, gets a big win there. He knocks out Liu Ping Wang in an awesome fight. Loses to Andre Ewell. It was a close fight by split decision. Just about everybody thought that Martinez won that fight. And then he comes out against Frankie Saenz in a fight where, I mean, it was almost a slam dunk. Jonathan Martinez is going to beat Frankie Saenz. You had seen what Frankie Saenz looked like against Marlon Vera. It was pretty much a throwaway. Martinez is going to do the same. But you can see it up on the screen where I put it. Jonathan Martinez weighed in 140.5 pounds for a fight at bantamweight. That's bad. And that fight was about 2 months ago. I don't like that. I mean, yes, Martinez looked great in the fight. Obviously, he did. And Thomas Almeida, I said it from the jump. You might not be familiar with him, but let me school you if you're not familiar. This was a guy that beat every can he could. He took the Primo Pasta, he took the tomato soup, he took whatever he could on the regional scene, like this can of Red Bull, and smashed it on his forehead and just beat everybody. And he looked amazing. And then he came into the UFC and he faced competition. So he fights Matt's guy. Tell me about his fight with UFC 196. He beat Tim Gorman in his debut. And I mean, he had fought in Legacy. He was their vacant bantamweight champ. They love to throw those around. Casey Kenny, former vacant bantamweight champ or interim bantamweight champ. But he beats Tim Gorman, and then he has some competitive fights. Tell me Thomas Almeida's trajectory, even especially, I guess, after the win over Anthony Burchak.
So we talk about this a lot. There's fighters in their first 5 or 6 fights in the UFC, and you'll look at the record, and it'll be like, okay, so they've lost to Beneil Dariush and Paul Felder, but their wins are over 2 guys who are no longer in the UFC anymore. So you're in this weird territory, and where it's kind of hard to judge that person's talent. Thomas Almeida might be the most extreme version of that case we've ever seen in MMA. And I don't think that's an exaggeration, because you have to remember, go back to 2015 and Thomas Almeida's at the top of the world. He knocked out Brad Pickett in one of the greatest fights of all time. That's the one that I'm really going to highlight, because in that fight, at that point in Almeida's career, he was known as this phenomenal striker. He didn't have much regard for getting hit, and he threw everything. And using the term buzzsaw kind of goes to his style as well. There's spinning elbows, flying knees, and really good Muay Thai practitioner as well. Has great elbows from the clinch. Can kind of do everything from an offensive standpoint. Here's the problem, though. Thomas Almeida doesn't have his hands up ever, and it's not like he's a Mark Hunt where, okay, if my hands aren't up, I can take an ungodly amount of punishment. Thomas Almeida gets dropped in every single one of his fights, and the Pickett fight was the first one that stood out where I started to get worried about him kind of long-term, because Brad Pickett at that stage of his career, he had went from bantamweight, longtime WEC fighter, longtime UFC guy, moves down to flyweight, doesn't go all that well for him, and then this was his return back up to bantamweight, very hyped up fight, but it was kind of one of those squash matches where it was, okay, we're going to have this young guy's going to beat the well-known veteran of Brad Pickett, and of course that's the result, but if you actually go back and watch that fight, Brad Pickett drops Thomas Almeida like 3 times, shatters his nose, completely outboxes him, and then once Almeida starts to, do his crazy stuff, he's able to hit Brad Pickett with one of the greatest flying knee knockouts you'll ever see. But from that point on, it's been a really weird career trajectory. Don't know why that was so difficult. He fights Cody Garbrandt in his first UFC main event, and that was at a point where, okay, if Almeida wins this fight, it's on. Like, he might not fight for the title next, but he's going to fight one of those Uriah Fabers, a TJ, a Dominic Cruz. He's going to fight one of the top guys in the division. Cody Garbrandt went out there, knocked him out, and it wasn't even close. The boxing of Garbrandt really got to Almeida, and I think that's a problem for Almeida. When you do look at his other losses as well, you got the Jimmy Rivera's and the Rob Fonts in there. Jimmy Rivera doesn't have power behind his shots, but technically as a boxer, he is quite good. And then Rob Font, of course,
All power.
All power. Another one of Craig's like weird favorite fighters, but he's got great range on his shots, good kicks, and great boxing as well. Almeida is so hittable, and it just... When that's the characteristic I think of when I first think of what Thomas Almeida is as an MMA fighter, yes, I think of the violent finishes that he has, but I also think about all those times that I've seen him get cracked and get really, really hurt. Now, Jonathan Martinez isn't a Rob Font level striker. I'm not gonna, I'm not here to tell you that. But what he is a very dangerous threat in every area of MMA. Because if Thomas Almeida comes back and just thinks, okay, they're giving me Jonathan Martinez, I should be ranked right now, and kind of disregards Martinez's skills, I think it's going to be a long night for Almeida. Because Martinez can crack you on the feet. If it goes to the mat, I'm more than comfortable with him on top of Thomas Almeida. I think that's probably what he's going to be going for anyways and kind of switch it up. But with Almeida, again, if you lose to Jimmy Rivera, Rob Font, and Cody Garbrandt, no shame in that. I'm sure there's other guys out there with those 3 losses on their careers. But then to have your UFC wins be guys like Anthony Barichak and Brad Pickett, it just kind of puts you in this really weird category where I don't know if Thomas Almeida's a prospect anymore. I don't know if he's a contender. I don't know if he's, you hate to use the word kind of has been, but I don't really know what Thomas Almeida is at this stage of his career.
It's tough to tell which Thomas Almeida you're going to get. I think that's a really good point, and that's what makes this fight interesting and tough to try and predict, because on his best day, he's a contender in the bantamweight division. On his worst day, he's a guy that can't crack the top 15, let alone a top 20 or top 25. So it leaves a lot of question marks. I mean, if you have a look at it over on the Instagram, looks as good as he ever has. And if you have a look over on Tapology, he had a bout that was supposed to happen in 2019 against Marlon Vera, eye injury. He was supposed to take on Alejandro Perez in this fight. Martinez steps in on short notice with Perez out. So if we have a look, I mean, in totality, over on Tapology to the predictions, 580 of them, 73% going with Almeida, 61% predicting him to win by knockout. And if we look at the odds, there's a limited sample size of the odds. Almeida opened an average of a -190 favorite. He's now a -111 or so. Martinez opened +165. I mean, it's a pick'em fight at this point in terms of the odds. I like that for Almeida. Again, we're talking upside. This guy could be, a ranked bantamweight. And I don't think it's not too far-fetched to say it. I do worry, though, because, again, this is a guy that's 1-3 in his last 4. He's been finished in 2 of those fights. Now, Garbrandt is a former champion who is on his rise to becoming a champion. Rob Font is a perennial contender. I wouldn't say that tomorrow he's going to challenge for the title.
He's that 15-10 guy.
But he's your guy that's going to hang in there coming out of a great gym in Massachusetts at Lausanne's. But this is a competitive fight. If Martinez wins, boom. We're knocking on the door of the top 15. If Almeida wins, it's probably for sure a top 15 opponent. Yeah. And, if he wins, it's going to be, that was the tune-up fight, like you said. I'm taking Almeida. It's tough.
And
the odds are so juicy that you want it. I'm going to pass, but I like Almeida in this one.
So we're going to look bad no matter who we predict. Because if Almeida wins, it's going to be by first round knockout. And if he loses, it's probably going to be by first round knockout. I don't see this fight being overly competitive. It's just going to really be one way or the other. So I'm going to pick Jonathan Martinez just to be the contrarian. I do need to get some picks on Craig. He kind of pulled ahead last weekend. So I'm going to say Jonathan Martinez. I trust his durability a lot more than I trust Thomas Almeida. Thomas Almeida had a very serious eye injury that he needed surgery for in all this time off. And he's been off for over 2 years, which is never something you want to see, especially with a guy like Almeida, who's very much a rhythm fighter, who has to kind of get into his, leg kick, then open up my combinations. I think that time off might affect him a little bit more than it would other fighters. So I'm going to pick Jonathan Martinez in this one.
Matt, I'm really looking forward to this fight. I've got Almeida. You got Martinez. We've got a great lineup coming up, and it's headlined by an awesome fight between Brian Ortega and the Korean Zombie, so you're going to want to keep it locked in for that, Matt. And as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it.